The ring wasn't hers. The dress wasn't hers. And the life she was stepping into, standing in the front hall of a house she had never been invited to before, was not hers either. It had belonged in every way that mattered to her sister. Sylvia had been the one engaged to Mr. Aldous Pemberton of Bramblewood, a well-regarded estate 40 miles outside Halifax. Sylvia had been the one their mother had dressed in the blue silk every Sunday for 2 years, parading her through church socials and dinner parties, until Aldous Pemberton finally did what everyone had been waiting for him to do. And Sylvia had been the one, 6 days before the wedding, who disappeared, not quietly, not with any grace at all. She had left behind a note, a half-packed trunk, and the distinct impression that she had run off with a man named Gordon Fitch, who sold agricultural equipment out of Truro. Their mother had fainted twice upon reading the letter and was not yet recovered. Their father had not spoken above a whisper since Tuesday. The Pembertons had been informed in the most careful, apologetic terms their mother could manage through her smelling salts and her devastation. And so it was that Verity Stowe, 24 years old, second daughter, the quiet one, found herself standing in the front hall of Bramblewood with a borrowed ring on her finger, being introduced to her new husband. She had not been asked, not exactly. The asking, if you could call it that, had happened in the kitchen on a Thursday morning, with her mother's hands shaking around a cup of tea that had gone cold, and her father sitting very still at the table, looking at the wallpaper. The Pembertons would still consider it, her mother had said, if we offered someone, if we explained. Verity had looked at her father. Her father had looked at the wallpaper. He hasn't met me, Verity said. No, said her mother, but he hasn't withdrawn the arrangements either. He sent a letter. A very civil letter. A civil letter, Verity repeated. He is a reasonable man. This was how it was decided. Aldous Pemberton was 31 years old, and not what she had expected, though she would not have been able to say what she had expected. Sylvia had described him as steady. Their mother had called him respectable. Neither of these things had given Verity a picture of a person, only a picture of a category. He was tall and had the look of a man who spent most of his time outdoors, and had not quite made his peace with the indoors yet. His handshake, when they were introduced in the front parlor with her mother weeping softly into a handkerchief, and his solicitor, standing to one side pretending to examine the bookshelves, was firm and brief, and gave nothing away. Miss Stowe, he said. Mr. Pemberton, she said. That was the whole of it. The ceremony, 3 days later, was small. The same church, the same flowers that had been ordered. The florist had already been paid, and nobody wanted to discuss the waist. Verity wore the ivory dress her mother had spent 6 months altering for Sylvia, let out at the shoulders and taken in at the waist, and she stood at the front of St. Andrew's, and married a man she had spoken to for perhaps 40 minutes in total, across 3 exceedingly uncomfortable dinners. She did not cry. She had decided she would not cry, and she did not. Her new husband did not cry either. He stood beside her with the particular stillness of a man who had made a decision and was not going to revisit it. Whether that decision had cost him anything, she could not tell. It was not until they were in the carriage, just the two of them, finally, heading back to Bramblewood without the mothers and the solicitor and the weeping florist, that he turned to look at her and said, "You didn't want this." It was not a question. Verity looked at him. The afternoon light came sideways through the carriage window and caught the dust on the glass. "No more than you did," she said. Something shifted in his face. Not a smile, not quite. But something. "Fair enough," he said, and looked back out his own window. She thought, briefly, that this might not be entirely unbearable. Bramblewood was a working estate, not a showpiece. She understood this within the first hour. The parlor had good bones, but the curtains needed replacing. The kitchen garden had gone partly to seed on the eastern side. There was a stack of correspondence on the desk in the front study that had clearly been waiting for attention since sometime in March, and the housekeeper, a compact woman named Mrs. Dallow, greeted Verity with the expression of someone who had been managing a household without adequate support for quite some time and was cautiously willing to believe that this might change. "The cook comes in 6 days a week," Mrs. Dallow said, walking Verity through the house with the brisk efficiency of someone who had given this tour before and been disappointed by the recipient. "The upstairs maid is new as of February. She's good, but she needs direction. The west wing roof was repaired last autumn and should hold, but I'd not put anything valuable under it until we've had a dry season to be certain." "And Mr. Pemberton?" Verity asked. "He rises at 5, Mrs. Dallow said, without inflection. "Takes his breakfast alone. He's usually back from the Southfields by noon. He does not like to be interrupted during the morning accounts." "What does he like?" Verity asked before she'd thought about whether she should. Mrs. Dallow considered this for a moment. Quiet, she said. And things that work properly. Verity looked around at the curtains and the stack of correspondence and the garden gone to seed on the eastern side. All right, she said. Let's start with the accounts. She did not see him for most of the first week. This was not avoidance, exactly. It was more the natural shape of two people who had not yet worked out how to move around each other, occupying the same house with the careful courtesy of strangers sharing a railway car. They ate dinner together. Occasionally they passed each other in the hall. He asked, once, if she had everything she needed. She said yes. He nodded and went back to whatever he had been doing. She had brought 3 things from home that were actually hers. A small writing case that had been her grandmother's. A copy of Agnes Grey that she had read so many times the spine had given out, and a habit she had developed over years of living quietly in a house that found her unremarkable. The habit of watching and remembering and keeping her own counsel. She used all 3. By the second week she had gone through the correspondence on the desk. Not reading it, just organizing it by date and origin, so that at least the surface was clear. She had spoken with the upstairs maid, whose name was Nettie, and who was in fact very capable, but had been given no direction whatsoever, and had been making up the household routine more or less from instinct. She had walked the kitchen garden with the groundskeeper, a man named Spruce, who looked at her as though he was waiting for her to say something foolish, and then looked somewhat less hostile when she didn't. She had not yet touched the west wing curtains. She was saving that for when she needed something to feel like progress. On the 12th day, Aldous came back from the South Fields an hour earlier than usual, and found her in the study with the estate ledger open on the desk. She looked up. He looked at the ledger. Neither of them spoke for a moment. I wasn't reading them, she said. I was looking at the format. The columns from 1887 are organized differently than the current ones, and I thought if I could map out the shift it might make the quarterly comparison easier. He was quiet for a moment that lasted long enough to make her wonder if she had overstepped. The format changed when my father died, he said. He used the older system. I changed it when I took over and never went back to reconcile them. I could, she said, if that would be useful. Another pause. It would take some time, he said. I have time, she said. I have rather a lot of it at the moment. He looked at her. There was something in his face that she hadn't seen in the dinners and the carriage and the brief corridor exchanges. Something that was trying to decide whether to trust her. The ink in the second drawer is better than what's on the desk, he said finally. The desk ink goes too thick in cold rooms. He left. She found the ink. She began with 1887. Her sister wrote in September. The letter came addressed to Mrs. Pemberton of Bramblewood, Nova Scotia, in Sylvia's handwriting, which was round and slightly cramped on the left side of every word the way it had always been. Verity sat with it in her hand for a long moment before she opened it. Sylvia was in Montreal. She sounded, in the way that Sylvia always sounded, entirely certain that she had done the right thing. Gordon was wonderful. The city was wonderful. She hoped Verity was well and not too terribly put out. I know it wasn't fair, she wrote. But it would have been worse to go through with it. You'll manage much better than I would have. You always do. Verity read this twice. She set the letter down on the writing case. She went to the window, which looked out over the kitchen garden, where Spruce was doing something with the far beds that she didn't fully understand but had been told would improve the yield by spring. You'll manage much better than I would have. You always do. This was the whole of it. Not an apology. Not really. A reassignment of the problem to the person Sylvia had always trusted to absorb problems quietly and without complaint. An observation dressed up as a compliment. Verity thought about the ring that had been Sylvia's. The dress that had been Sylvia's. The life that had been Sylvia's until Sylvia had decided she didn't want it. She thought about the ledger, and the ink in the second drawer, and Mrs. Dallow's expression on the first day when she had said, "Let's start with the accounts." She did not write back. Not yet. Not until she had worked out what she actually wanted to say, which was going to take more time than she had available that afternoon. October was cool and clear, and the harvest on the South Fields came in better than expected. She knew this because Aldous told her, over dinner, with the careful neutrality of a man reporting facts, and not yet sure how much to offer beyond them. But there was something in the way he said it, the way he set down his fork and said, "The yield on the South Fields came in at 12% over last year." That told her this mattered to him, that he was not reporting it neutrally at all, only making it look that way. "Because of the drainage work?" she asked. He looked up. "You know about the drainage work?" Spruce mentioned it in August. He said it was your project. He didn't think it would make the difference it did. Spruce thinks every project is unlikely to make the difference it does, Aldous said. It's a structural feature of his character. Is it effective? She asked. Extraordinarily, he said. He's never wrong about the work itself. He's only pessimistic about outcomes. She laughed. It surprised her. The realness of it, the way it came out before she could decide about it. He looked at her across the table with an expression she couldn't entirely read, but which did not look unhappy. You fixed the east side of the garden, he said. Spruce fixed it. I just told him which section to prioritize. He told me it was your idea. He was being generous. Spruce is not generous, Aldous said. He's accurate. She thought about this. He went back to his dinner. The candle between them burned lower, and neither of them moved to light another. She found the letter by accident. She had not been looking for anything. She had been in the upstairs study, the smaller one, which Aldous rarely used, because Nettie had been cleaning the main study and Verity needed to finish the 1889 ledger reconciliation before the end of the week. The desk in the upstairs study had a stuck drawer that she'd been meaning to mention to Mrs. Dallow, and when she finally worked it open, looking for a ruler, she found a bundle of papers tied with string that were not ledger pages and not correspondence and not anything she had expected. They were letters, from Sylvia. Not 1 or 2. 14, spanning, from the dates on them, the last 2 years of the engagement. She should have stopped at the first line of the first one. She knew this. She stopped at the first line, recognized what she was reading, and then, with the particular failure of good judgment that comes from already knowing something you don't want to know, read 3 more. The letters were not love letters. They were worse than love letters. They were the letters of a person explaining, carefully, and with increasing confidence, why the whole arrangement had never truly suited her, why she had always been performing rather than feeling, why the kindest thing for everyone would be for her to withdraw, and reassuring him, with Sylvia's characteristically absolute certainty, that he would be fine. He always seemed fine. He was the sort of person who would be fine. She put them back. She closed the drawer. She sat with her hands flat on the desk for a long time. He had known, or had suspected. He had had these letters and he had gone ahead with the arrangement anyway, with her, and she did not know whether that was because he was practical, or because he was grieving something he was not going to admit to, or because the whole thing had simply been easier than reversing it. She did not know and she could not ask. Not directly. Not yet. She finished the ledger reconciliation. She did not mention the drawer, but it sat with her. It sat with her through November and into December, through the first proper snowfall that came early and covered the south fields in white, that Aldous stood looking at from the back window, with an expression she now recognized as his thinking face. It sat with her through Christmas, which they spent quietly at Bramblewood, with her parents briefly visiting. Her mother trying very hard not to compare this Christmas to the one she had imagined, and doing a moderate job of it. It sat with her through January, when the cold came in serious and the house closed around itself, and they were indoors together more than they had been, reading by separate fires in the same room in the evenings. She had been watching him for 5 months. She was good at watching. And what she had learned, through those months, was that Aldous Pemberton was not a man who was fine. He was a man who had decided to appear fine, which is a different thing and considerably more expensive. She had watched him spend an entire evening trying to read the same page of a book. She had watched him stand in the garden in the rain, not moving, for 10 minutes, for no reason she could identify. She had watched him, at dinner, begin to say something, and then close it back up, smooth it over, pass her the bread instead. She was his wife. She had, in some technical and increasingly less technical sense, earned the right to ask. She asked on a Tuesday in January, over the remains of dinner, while the wind hit the west side of the house and the candle had burned almost entirely down. "Do you ever regret it?" she said. He set down his glass. He knew, she could tell, exactly what she was asking. "Do you?" he said. This was not deflection. It was the same question back at her, genuine, with the particular quality of a man who wanted to know before he committed to an answer. She thought about the ring and the dress, and the letter from Sylvia, and the drawer with the 14 letters, and the ledger from 1887, and the ink that went thick in cold rooms, and Spruce's exact and ungenerous accuracy, and the 12% over last year and the candle burning down between them while neither of them moved to replace it. "I did," she said, "in the beginning." He was quiet. "And now?" he said. "Now I'm not sure regret is the right word for what I'm feeling." "What is the right word?" She looked at him across the table. Last of the candle threw everything in amber and shadow, and he was watching her with the steady attention of a man who had, she realized, been watching her for 5 months, too. "I don't know yet," she said. "I'll tell you when I find it." He nodded. He did not push. She had come to understand that this was one of his best qualities. The ability to let a thing be unfinished without needing to force it to a conclusion. She wrote to Sylvia in February. She took her time with it. She wrote 3 drafts before she was satisfied, not because she wanted to be cruel, but because she wanted to be accurate, and accuracy with Sylvia required care. She told her sister that she had found the letters in the upstairs study, and that she was not angry. This was true, mostly, and that she understood, in the way she had always understood, how Sylvia moved through the world, making decisions at speed and handing the consequences to whoever was nearest. She wrote, "I want you to know that I'm not managing, the way you said I would. I'm not managing at all. Managing implies getting through something difficult and arriving at a neutral place on the other side. That's not what's happening." She paused here for a long time. Outside, snow was coming off the roof in long slides. She wrote, "What's happening is something else, and I don't have a word for it yet. But I wanted you to know, because I think you've always assumed that the things you put down, I pick up and carry without it touching me. It touches me. It has always touched me. I've just been quieter about it than you. I'm not angry at you, Sylvia. But I think I'm done being the person you leave things for." She sealed it. She gave it to the post in town on Thursday. She did not feel lighter, exactly, but she felt clearer, like a window in winter after someone finally takes the time to wipe the frost from the inside of the glass. Spring came slowly, and then all at once, the way it does in Nova Scotia. 1 week frozen ground, the next week mud and meltwater, and the smell of the earth opening up again. Aldous found her in the kitchen garden in early April, where she was doing what was now a familiar thing, standing in the east beds telling Spruce what she thought about the spacing on the early lettuce. Spruce was disagreeing with her. This was also familiar. "You'll thin it in 3 weeks anyway," she said. "I'll thin it when it needs thinning," Spruce said. "It'll need thinning in 3 weeks. You've been here 8 months. 9, she said. "And I'm right about the lettuce." Spruce made a sound that might have been a concession and turned back to the beds. She looked up and found Aldous watching from the gate. There was something on his face that she had been learning to read over the winter. Something that appeared when he thought she wasn't looking, or when she said something that landed differently than she'd intended. Something careful and warm and not entirely sure of itself. He opened the gate and came in. "The south field drainage needs looking at before the melt is done," he said. "I know. I've been meaning to ask you about extending the system to the middle fields. If the yield improvement holds, it might be worth the investment." He looked at her for a moment. "Where did you get the figures for the middle fields?" he said. "The 1889 ledger. The yield disparity between the south and middle fields has been consistent for 7 years. I think it's drainage." "So does Spruce," he said. "Then we're all in agreement," she said. The morning was cool and gray, and the garden smelled of wet soil, and the first green things of the year pushing up through where the frost had been. Spruce had moved to the far beds and was pointedly ignoring both of them. "Verity," Aldous said. She turned to him. He had that expression again. The one that meant he had been working up to something for longer than today. "I should have asked you before any of it," he said. "The arrangement, the transfer of it, from your sister to you. I should have come to you first directly and asked if you were willing. Instead, I let the families manage it, and I told myself it was practical, and it was, but it wasn't right." She had not expected this. She had prepared herself for most things over these months, but not for this. For him standing in the kitchen garden in April, looking at her with the careful honesty of someone who had been rehearsing something difficult and had decided to simply say it. "Why are you telling me this now?" she said. "Because I've been thinking about it since January," he said. "When you asked if I regretted it, and you said you didn't know the right word yet, and I've been waiting for you to find it. And if the word is something bad," she said, "then I'd rather know," he said. "I'd rather know and have the chance to do something about it than keep on as we are with you being too polite to tell me." She looked at him. "I'm not polite," she said. "I've disagreed with you twice this week." "About the drainage and the curtain rods," he said. "I was right about both." "Yes," he said. "You were." The garden was quiet around them. Somewhere on the other side of the fence, Spruce was making the sounds of a person working with great deliberate noisiness in order to signal that he was not listening. "The word I found," she said slowly, "is unexpected." He waited. "I didn't want this," she said. "And then I was here, and it was real, and you were real, and I found that I'd stopped looking for reasons to leave and started." She paused. started looking for reasons to stay. And, he said, and there are more than I expected, she said. That's all I'm saying. It was not everything. It was not the whole of what she had worked out, over winter and January, and the ledgers and the letters, about what it meant to arrive somewhere by accident, and find that it fit you better than anything you had chosen deliberately. It was not the whole of what she felt, standing in this garden that was also her garden now, in this life that had been someone else's, and was now, unmistakably, her own. But it was enough for April. It was enough for today. Aldous nodded. He looked out over the east beds where the lettuce was coming up in the spacing that she had recommended, and spruce had not agreed to, and which was already, clearly, going to need thinning in exactly 3 weeks. I'm glad you stayed, he said. It was simple and direct, and she believed him entirely. So am I, she said. She turned back to the garden. He stayed, leaning against the fence beside her. Spruce arrived at the near beds, and looked at both of them, with the expression of a man who had witnessed what he needed to witness, and was now prepared to move on. 3 weeks, Spruce said, looking at the lettuce. 3 weeks, said Verity. He said nothing more. Neither did she. The morning held still around them, and the garden grew toward the light the way things do when the ground has finally warmed enough to matter.